Today's guest is Martin Brooker. He is a now retired decorated veteran of the Royal Australian Navy, a keynote speaker, and a leadership coach who has spent nearly 4 decades navigating some of the most complex and high stakes environments in the world. From commanding ships in the Middle East and Pacific to leading Australia's elite clearance divers to serving as a deputy commander of Australia's joint forces in Afghanistan, Martin knows that in moments of complexity, the difference between failure and success comes down to leadership. But what sets Martin apart is his unwavering belief that the highest performing leaders aren't just technically competent, they're emotionally competent. And in this conversation, we're going to explore what leadership looks like under extreme pressure, how to shift from technical mastery to emotional mastery, why culture change starts with the leader's capacity to listen, adapt, and trust, and how leaders can navigate ambiguity without losing sight of their mission. This is going to be a conversation for anyone who wants to lead with clarity, courage, and heart, no matter the battlefield. Martin, welcome to Heart-Led Changemakers.
Thanks, Maryanne. Great to be with you.
So, Martin, your career spans nearly 4 decades of military service. What has been your biggest personal lesson about leadership through it all?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I think the moment was when I understood that I needed to leave ego at the door, and that it was about people, the people in front of me. I often get asked this day and age about what's new in leadership, and the reality is nothing's new. It's always been about people. I actually heard John Maxwell speak, who some of your audience may know as a prolific sort of writer of leadership books, etc. And he quoted Theodore Roosevelt's quote, which is, "Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And I had a role when I was a junior officer, probably in my mid to late 20s, and realized that as I stood in front of a group of sailors that who had just come back from actually serving in the first Gulf War, that they did not care about me or my expectations or my vision for the organization at that particular time, or the ship and the operations room in which we were serving together. They wanted to know that I actually cared, because they really didn't trust me until I actually stepped across that threshold to show them I cared. And that moment was actually getting to know each one of them and what they'd experienced in that environment. And it was a game changer.
Yes, I can only imagine. And so how have you seen that translate in leadership around you as well? Like obviously leadership over the years has transformed and changed. People are becoming more emotionally intelligent.
Hmm.
How have you witnessed that change?
Yeah, look, I think in any organization, there is a culture and people are looking to find their way to fit into it. Um, Leadership is something that um, is often taken, not necessarily given, while we get opportunities to expand our capability or grow in a role, and we're given opportunities to step up and maybe act in a role. It is the opportunity that people get to actually move from realizing that the technical competence that may have got them the job is not the one that they actually need to actually be effective in the job. And I often say that it's that when you learn that it's about emotional competence, you've got to deal with people that will be your pattern for success going forward. Then that's when you get the shift. To get a shift that like that in a whole of a team and organization really does need a leader to set that example. And it would be fair to say that you know there are still plenty of people that have been successful with a task focus, but I reckon that there's an opportunity missed when you don't engage people and get that connection with them and build trust.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you've been in very high stakes, high pressure environments. I think CEOs in particular can attest to feelings of that from time to time, depending on their circumstances. But when you talk, when you, are talking about emotional competence, um, when you're in life or death situations, what what is the way to draw on that emotional competence? Well, like what are the key fundamentals in preparing
Mm,
and developing that side of things?
yeah. Frankly, if you're going to be faced with a situation, some of which I faced in command, it's the preparation, frankly. It's about getting individually understanding who you are as a person, um, being able to develop a team around you, and also working with that team to actually walk through the tough stuff,
Yeah.
to often practice. There's a saying that we don't rise to the occasion, but we fall to our level of training. And that level of training is actually about individually as self, but it's also a team. Um, Being able to protect yourself from dropping into uh, uncontrolled moments and reacting to a situation rather than responding to a situation is, I think, where is the work is. And I think that situation faces businesses, CEOs when they're trying to grow and scale a business. And and the reality is that, in my opinion, is that it's going to be the foundations you've built with the team and the relationship you have with the team that will allow you to get through those tougher times. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And we've seen some of the really large multinational corporations go through challenging times. We saw Optus, for example, when they had their breach. Those moments feel
Mm.
a bit like life and death, I'm sure, not only for the CEO, but for the organizations as a whole. When you're working with leaders, how are you helping them see the often invisible? I know that you do that in a lot of your work. How do you help them see where the opportunities are?
Yeah, look, I think you need. So I guess it's probably useful for me to reflect on my own journey in this regard. Um, you know, who likes feedback? Not many people, but the reality is that feedback is actually where we really get a mirror held up in front of us to perhaps where there's a blind spot for us. And I definitely had a couple of those moments along the way in my career. What I learned though um, is that you actually need that moments of feedback and to get a sense of where you're not going so well to be able to make that shift. Um, I want to be clear that I'm not talking about the fact that it's all about people. It's definitely it's a blend of task versus people, and good leaders pick the moment when it's about the task, but the task is executed in a much more better way when I've done the work as a leader individually, as also when I've done the work with my team to actually work out how we're going to work together in the best possible way. And it's if I use the Optus case an example, I'm not wasn't privy to what's going on in the background, but you saw publicly um, that they were unprepared to respond to that scenario. And that tells me that actually they hadn't thought about what it would be like if they had that scenario. They had not walked through the scenario planning around that situation to understand how they would respond. I think a lot of the market, a lot of the community stood back and said, "Well, you've made a mistake, whatever it is. I actually need you to step in right now so that I can continue to trust you." And that's the key for me is that if you've got a foundation of trust, then you've got to respond to that and respond in a way in which continues to reinforce the trust. And that's not about media spin. It's not about deception. It's actually about being genuinely saying, actually, we don't have the immediate answer, but here's what we're doing about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the really large organizations, really any organization could take note of that and work on that preparation, but also work on
Mm,
that trust that they're going to be received well in just acknowledging, actually, we don't have the answer. And part of the frustration, I think, that comes with their clients and customers the people on the receiving end is because that's not transparent. I'm curious, when you look at your history in the Navy and when you look at like organizations and corporates, is there lessons and things to be learned that can be adapted into those corporates from what you learn in defense?
Look, it's really interesting. The Navy career is actually lots of moments of preparation for sometimes the thing that never happens. Um, but what I think the lessons for me from the Navy that are relevant is in relation to that individual leadership, but also how do I bring a team together in the best possible way. When I was the captain of my ship, Manura, I actually joined the ship in Burnie, Tasmania, and the ship was in port there. I walked on board at 8 o'clock in the morning, and 11:15 we sailed away from the wharf with the other captain that I'd taken over from, having left the ship. And I'd only spent a couple of days previously on the sister ship. Much of the ship's configuration, the layout, and all that kind of stuff was not something that was embedded within me. But what I was clear, what was able to we were able to do was to depart the harbour safely, and with everybody doing their job. And that worked because there was an organisation in place. There was role clarity about what people were expected to do, and there was a good policies and processes and a team that had worked together for a long time. Excuse me. Before we left the harbour, I said to the guys, "I am not the expert in this ship. You guys are. My expectations are well defined in terms of I expect to be told when things are not going well. Other than that, there's a clear plan, a clear mission. Let's get on with it." Knowing that they were trained and they were organised and capable of doing that job. I think it's challenging sometimes when leaders want to take over and try and control a moment because they think they can. That's when people stop participating. That's when people stop sticking their hand up and telling you that there's a risk that you're about to walk into. And so the leader's role for me is all about creating culture. And sometimes we have to do it in a moment to create that moment.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that's an important consideration and a way for leaders to pause and just ask themselves how much are they allowing their staff to do what they do best, and
Mm.
are they guiding, or are they getting, maybe too involved? Are they taking over? Are they, because of outcomes and deliverables, are they embedding themselves too much in the day to day
Yeah.
rather than just leading? And
Mm.
there's a humility that comes with that kind of decisive action, isn't there?
Well, I think it's also as an individual leader, it's about having confidence in your own ability, but also reinforcing the trust that people can trust you.
Yeah.
You can't tell people that I trust you, so get on with it. It's actually you've got to show people that can be trusted as well. That you're not about to jump all over them when something doesn't go right. Um, when I was reflecting on this the other day in a conversation, and it was in relation to, I guess, what the expectations are in business right now, and there's Marcus Friedman, I think it was Marcus Friedman, made the comment, Milton Friedman, sorry, who talked about shareholder value, and that's become part of business right now, and has for many years now, made famous, I guess, by Jack Welch as well, in that there is this perception that shareholder value is the only thing that's important. Now, absolutely, shareholders are absolutely important. They own the business, and getting their return on investment is absolutely important. However, you don't get to that outcome without leading the people to it. And so the challenge for leaders, challenge for CEOs when they've got shareholders that have expectations with regards to value is that they are positioning themselves to recognise that actually what it's going to take to deliver that value. And you don't deliver an effective product or service, you don't gain market share if you've got a team of people that don't know what to do or are reluctant to step in and solve problems because you have perhaps been over controlling in the way in which you lead your organization.
Yes. And that obviously affects the culture overall. You've led the Navy's biggest change program. When you think
Hmm.
about shifting culture in any organization, what do you think is the hardest part?
The hardest part is to recognize that everybody has a role. So if you go to Cotter's sort of theories and frameworks regarding change, I think is still very effective. And in that, he talks about developing a guiding coalition of people. When we did the change in Navy, we identified around about 500 people, including senior, middle, ranking, and junior people that were part of that guiding coalition. But the challenge was still to get recognized, to get people to recognize that if you have a particular role, you have responsibility for a group of people, you have as much a role leading that change as the rest of us do. And so it's getting people to recognize that we all have a role in producing effective change in organizations. And it's the culture as an organization that affects both teams and individuals that we've got to pay attention to. If we don't pay attention to that culture, then we are less able to respond to the change that is either coming or the one we need to absolutely respond to in that moment.
Yes. Some of the work, well, a big piece of the work that I do is resolving trauma in the workplace, in organizations.
Yeah.
And I find it there's parallels with obviously the defense force with trauma, and there'd be a lot more, probably more than what I can even quantify in my mind, in the Navy. How is that worked through there, and how what you've learned and what you were trained in and with, how do you use that to resolve that in with leaders and with organizations?
Yeah. Look, any time where there has been trauma in an organization and whether the organization has been responsible for that or institutionally responsible for that, whatever that situation is, I think the first thing that you've got to do is actually be uh, in a listening mode to actually understand what's actually happened. I think the second thing is to not necessarily try and solve the problem immediately, although that will be important. It's actually being able to be present to that person and recognize that they have been through something that you may have never experienced, and that you've got to show a level of empathy, which is um, not necessarily, again, trying to imagine yourself, but also just being able to perhaps take a step backwards and go, wow, I'm not sure how I could have responded to that situation, or I'm not sure what that would be like. And while it's not my experience, I really do want to understand that and be grateful for the fact that somebody had the guts to share that challenging moment with you. Um, Organizational responses to trauma, I think, are paramount. We see it still in organizations, whether it's the military or other organizations. People want to go to work and be safe in that environment. And so that is a leadership led activity. And while we might drop to judgment occasionally, we also do need to recognize that the organization has those fiduciary responsibilities around that. And actually, you don't become effective at that unless you're effective as a leader. I think the also other point I would make on this is that uh, it's you don't want it to be too late. You don't want the trauma to already happen. Um, I think while there's, again, come back to shareholder value, while that's important, as a leader, I want to invest myself in making sure that my organization is strong from a cultural perspective, is that people feel that they're included, um, that there is people are feeling like they want to be part of what that workplace or organization is delivering on, and that they are there to make a contribution. And that doesn't happen unless people are creating that environment and and making sure that they're calibrating the culture when it's not right.
Yes, absolutely. And there's trauma of different kinds because there's physical trauma that happens, but there's also the emotional trauma as well. And
Yes.
the when we were talking before about showing and guiding leaders to see the invisible, what I do is I show them the invisible trauma that they cannot see. It's the unspoken, and it's trauma that's not necessarily been made in the workplace. It's what's brought in and and what has been left from the people who have been there before them. So it might be stuff that have left and moved on, but that energy
Yeah.
still sits in the organization. And I'm curious, when you were in the Navy, how was the emotional component and the physical component dealt with? Was it like what you were just describing, or was there a specific strategy that was used to resolve?
Hmm. Uh, I think my response to that is probably in two parts. I think one is that the way that we prepare our forces to go into tough situations builds resilience, natural resilience within the organisation team. It goes back to what I said before about um, having uh, a team of people that know their job, have been trained individually, and have been trained as a team to do the job. When you stretch people and prepare them for difficult circumstances in a safe, simulated environment, then we actually grow that capacity, we grow resilience. And so then when you are actually maybe faced with a physical or a psychological, social issue, then perhaps we're more resilient to be able to respond to that rather than react to it. I think the second part is that when you are, as a leader, made aware that there's been an incident of whether it be physical or emotional, that your response is unwavering to actually respond to it as though it has happened and actually take that action accordingly to establish what the facts are. And I guess I'm trying to think of the right word to express this, but it's like you're sort of almost doing this in good faith and believing that it's true until proven otherwise.
Yep.
Um, you know, we've got to be careful of the stories we make up about people. You know, if we make up stories or make assumptions about certain things, then we probably just increase the risk of people being hurt, definitely emotionally.
Yes, absolutely. And do you find that that comes up as an issue with the leaders that you work with?
I think the people I've been working with since I left the Navy, it has always been the case that people are, a couple of things come up. One is I want to be able to better communicate with my people. Uh, I want to better communicate and influence my boss. I also want to be able to deal with conflict situations,
Yep.
and it's that's the landscape that I see both in public and private sector, and it does come back down to a couple of things for me. One is that as leaders, we get to choose every day what decisions we make, what our choices are in every moment and every day. And I think sometimes we've got to be able to step back and get on the balcony or get in the helicopter, whatever metaphor you want to use for it, and be able to step back and go, okay, what's the impact that I want to have in this moment? What's important for the organization? What's important for the people? And how do we want to feel when we tell a story about this situation in 12 months, 24 months time? I think the other factor here is that we also need to make sure that we are, leaving people in the best possible way, whatever the circumstances are, and being ready to shift gears, respond to a situation, and take action where we need to.
Yes, yes. Uh, More recently, over the last few years, you've been working with men and
Mm,
in in groups with men and leading that change and that transformation. Can you talk more to that work?
Hmm. Yeah, I it's probably something I wish I'd done early in my life, to be honest. But I what I have found is that we've got a lot of challenges in our society right now, and defining masculinity is one of those things. But what I want to talk to, I guess, around this is that often we have built up a framework of what we think the world is and what life looks like. Um, Often we can have built structures in our lives that kind of hold us in a certain place with a certain view of the world. Um, and what we don't necessarily see in those moments, particularly if we've been around for a little while, is we don't see the choices or the habits or the mindset that's maybe not having the impact that we actually really want. I think when you've actually had that a couple of times, or it's been shown to you that what you're doing is not working, then it's about what do you do about that? And it's not a quick fix. It's not going to a 1 hour seminar. It's actually being prepared to pull away the mask and to deal with stuff that may be in the shadows. And I can think of a couple of things in my life, and I'm not going to get into the detail of them, but they gave me a view of the world that had me behaving in a certain way that, to a certain extent, was successful and added to success. But when I actually looked at it in the light of day, I went, "Wow, that really did not help me." And I think the effectiveness of leaders goes back to, part of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, but I think it's more than that. It's actually being prepared to recognize where I've got patterns that are actually not who I am at a core. For me, I really had to go and do work around recognizing that I was probably out of alignment or out of integrity with the core values that I was brought up with and that perhaps were there since birth. And that was deep work, and it was with the support of other men. And so my encouragement to anybody who's sort of listening to this and going, I need to do something, or somebody's put a mirror up to me, or I've just been through divorce, or I've been through some other situation where I feel like I'm repeating behaviour, is that it's worth going and making inquiry into what options do I have. There are men's groups and organisations doing good men's work across Australia and across the globe. Some are faith-based, some are secular, and I think there's value just in being in community, recognising that you know that you the thing you did, or the challenge you have, or the behavior choice that you make on a regular basis, you are not alone, and that there are men that are also in the same, let me use a Navy metaphor, boat, and the reality is that the men will get around you to support whatever change it is that you think you need to make, and you'll be surprised that it's more than the mateship of being around the footy and with a beer. It's actually good, hard, honest truth. Not that I don't mind still watching the footy and having a beer, by the way.
I find it interesting that you say and that you shared that you wish that you'd gotten into this kind of work sooner, but I don't think it's a disconnect from what you were doing in the Navy. It might have been in a different way, but you were with
Mm,
large groups of men there and you were influencing, guiding, leading the
mm.
same way that you're doing now. It's just it's just different tools. Would you say that's fair to say?
Uh, Look, I think I brought some good values professionally to the work I did. I think it was more in my personal life, to be honest. And you know, we often think about workplaces as, often it's been the view that we, don't, we just, you come here to work, you don't get here to bring your whole life with you. But the reality is that we do. We're integrated humans. We've got stuff going on in our world. You can't avoid not bringing it to work. Um, so, yeah, look, I feel like there was steps along the way in my personal life that were a long way away from perhaps where they should have been. Not perhaps, they were a long way away from where they should have been. And
Mm.
successful career, no doubt, and great moments of leading people. And I know that my choices as a leader with other people was effective, and people still talk about it. But there were other things there. I go, you know what, that would have been useful to kind of deal with that earlier in life rather than wait to later.
Yes, and I'm sure any CEOs who are listening would feel the same way because all of them are successful. Obviously, they wouldn't be in the positions that they're in if they weren't
Mm.
successful. But a lot of the time, the personal side of things, that inner work is left by the wayside. It's like I'll get to it eventually. I'll just keep
Yeah.
going, just deal with this, just keep going, just deal with this. And all of a sudden, 10, 20, 30 years can sometimes pass and it goes like that,
Mm.
as we know. But all of a sudden, you do come to a turning point where and it is a choice, obviously, but sometimes people are pushed into having to face the things that they've abandoned, and it might be the values, it might be caring for themselves. That it's sometimes multi-pronged. I think
Yes.
that men's work is essential and so important in Australia, especially because men in Australia are so different from the rest of the world. They are, she'll be right, don't worry about it, just, don't think about it, suppress it, ignore it, numb it out, alcohol, football, all of the other tools that
Mm.
people use, and and keeping busy, which is a big thing that obviously CEOs and leaders do, but having a space and knowing that that is what's growing in Australia as well, but having men come together to work through that in a much deeper way, in a supportive way, is a real is a sign of times changing. And I'm wondering from your perspective as a man, as a leader, and now as someone leading others in this work, have you seen the shift in Australia? Have you seen that change as well, or do you think that it's always been there? What's your take?
Oh, look, I think that this work has blossomed. Maybe that's not the right word to express it, but it's certainly grown. And it's I think there are resources out there. We talk about the challenge with the incidents of domestic violence. We all talk about the incident of self-harm and suicidal ideation, particularly amongst men. Um, and there is a need to go and deal with the stuff that's in the shadows.
Mm,
To if we are faced with whether it be an emotional challenge or an addiction or something else, there's value in tapping into that. It has grown, I think, because it's important. I think it's grown because the time is now when it needs to be addressed. We are not going to solve some of those challenges I talked about before without men um, stepping into a place of integrity. When you were talking before, that was the word that was coming to mind. It's like, I need to be in integrity with who I was created to be. I need to be in integrity with my core values. I need to be the compass. Um, there are many men that feel really comfortable that they are always strong on values and strong on acting in integrity. And they may not see it the way that I've experienced it, but nonetheless, there will be men around those people that are perhaps not so easily anchored in those values of integrity. We often talk about integrity as being the thing you do when people aren't watching. Well, that is true. But I think another definition for me about integrity is that I'm in alignment with who I am as a core.
yeah.
And often that person at the core is somebody that probably, was more visible, perhaps earlier in their life. The person I was at the core, I think I recognized as somebody at around about the age of 11 and 12, and then stuff influenced the way in which I needed to behave. The culture said, hey, this is the way you need to behave to be successful, or here are things that will satisfy those unmet needs that you have. And so, yeah, it's an interesting space. I think the important thing is that when we discover that we've got something that's out of alignment, that we don't defer it or blow it off. We actually take personal accountability and responsibility for taking action and getting support around it. And it may be a tough time. I think that's the important thing here, is to say it may be a really challenging time to walk through that valley, to get through the other side. But you know what? I feel a lot lighter now from having done the work.
For sure. I absolutely love that you mentioned the word integrity. It's my number one value. It is uh, the fierce nature behind the work that I do, and I love that. That is what is at the foundation of this work as well, and why, and obviously why it resonates so much for me, because I've interviewed quite a lot of men who are working with other men in those groups. There's been a few who have been part of Sacred Sons, the international
Oh yeah,
organization. So that is very much in my mind's eye, and obviously because I work with men as well, it is there is there is something that you just can't quantify in words about what happens in those groups. And it is transformative, and it is a remembering, I think, for men who have got the wobbles, who've lost their way. The wheels are starting to fall off. They're starting to feel out of control. There's chaos being created in their lives, either by themselves or as a because they're avoiding the issues around them. And it is such a beautiful, um, it's just a really beautiful transformative change in Australia. Like I said, I think Australian men in particular are just told to soldier on. You sort of you've been trained that way. It's everything
mm,
is unspoken. So even if you're seeing a coach, even a coach now at this level, at this in this day and age, it's still all hidden. No one really talks about the things that they're doing to help themselves, and if they do, it's very much one-on-one. It's not really shared publicly. Everyone kind of keeps their stuff private. In America, for example, everything is open, and I really love that that is slowly starting to disintegrate here in Australia. And I
mm,
I've really loved over the last few years starting to see that momentum and that change, and more men like yourself who have already worked with large groups of men. You've already led, you are allowing your story and your path of this to be shared too. And you're so right, because when you start this work, male or female, when you go into the valley, like you say, you don't know what's in there, but you know it's going to be a little bit heavy, which is why
mm.
most people shy away from it, right? They don't want to deal with that
Yeah,
side of things because it is frightening. But what's the alternative? The alternative is more chaos, more shame, more guilt, more destruction, more sadness, more grief, more of a life that is not being like fulfilled in the way that it's supposed to.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective, what what does it take for leaders, CEOs, men in higher ranking positions? What does it take for them, and men in general, but what does it take for them to surrender to looking within, to doing that kind of work?
I think one of the challenges is the fear of the unknown. What am I going to find?
Yeah.
Um, I often characterize this work as, well, it feels like for me, you know, when I initially thought about this, it's like, okay, I'll go and do a weekend, or I'll just go and sort of dip my toe into this. And it's a bit like trying to swim 50 meters underwater and taking one breath and popping up at the other end. But the reality is that with a lifetime of story, of things that have happened in your life, It's a bit like you've got to dive into the abyss, into the darkness, and not know what you might find, but also go in there knowing that you're safe to do so. And
Mm.
that comes from working with a organization that's got credibility around it, that is takes the responsibility seriously. So I'm not sure if I answered your question directly, but I think it's the value is that we get to uh, reinvent's the wrong word, but it's actually getting back to who we are. And I think when you do that, you definitely feel more effective. Um, I feel like there are making choices is easier. I feel like I don't carry the burden of the weight of the things that were in the shadows before. The secrets, that were there, the secrets that I'd kept, and it's like, yeah, shedding those and getting rid of those means that I get to live life in full. And I think uh, somebody once described life, the word life, as a bit of an acronym for living full effectiveness. And I think that's what it's for me about.
Just circling back to my question, because that is definitely important. But what's going to help these CEOs and these leaders break through the resistance in and leaping into this work?
uh, I think what's going to help break through is to know that you're not alone and that there are people that can support you in that work and journey. Um, and it doesn't mean that you haven't got to do some work and that it won't be difficult, but it is actually knowing that there are resources around it and that other people have trodden that path before. Um, and yeah, I think there's value in getting it goes for me, it's always going back to the reward is worth it. I'm part of an organization called the Crucible Project, which is a men's and women's group for and Christian based, but um, our sort of I guess sort of view of the world is when if I have big honesty about what I'm dealing with, then there's big grace. There's a big reward for doing that work. If I only have a little bit of honesty, then probably there's a little bit of return on that. So I think it's about how do I get comfortable to be able to step through that threshold, knowing that there are people to support me.
Yes. And so for anyone listening, if they're at that point where things are feeling very heavy, things are feeling overwhelming, there's grief online, there is trauma online, there's a burden and overwhelm online, there is exhaustion online. What would you encourage them to do as a first step?
Well, in answering that question, I'm going to work on the basis that it's not at a crisis point, but it's actually something that needs attention. Frankly, if it's a crisis, then we should be seeking out those services that can support you in that moment of crisis. And of course, in Australia, that would be something like Lifeline. Um, if you have got to that point and you're going, I just need to do something, then I think it is about reaching out to an organisation that has that reputation work, and maybe it is about finding somebody that actually has gone down that track before. Maybe there's a mate you have to go, mate, I am really struggling. I actually don't know what to do, and find those resources. I'm happy to share resources that I know am aware of for those in Australia and the US. But it's actually I think it takes a lot of courage to step through that. Um, and but it is about finding somebody that can support you in that.
Yes, and that's a good reminder for anyone who is going through immediate challenging times. Lifeline is a good port of call for some advice and some initial respite. But there are some excellent organisations for men and excellent support groups around the place. And I'm thrilled that, like I said, I'm absolutely thrilled that that is growing in Australia because it's needed, and there's not enough of that, but it's increasing. So That's really good
Mm.
news. How
Yeah.
do you support leaders that are in denial about the fact that they may be creating chaos and maybe avoiding their own overwhelm and shame and trauma? Like what is your approach with all of that?
Yeah, look, it's challenging if a senior person in an organization is at least open to having that conversation, then I think what you do need is somebody who has the skill to be able to do that, to be able to crack open that door. Look, we've talked about feedback. I got some real personal feedback at a middle to senior ranking level that was delivered by a staff member to me. Um, if there was a level of trust, and she had a courage to say, you know what, boss, this you're doing this, and it's not having the impact that you think you want to have with it. And it was a real wake up call. Um, I think there is value in any tool that gives you feedback. Um, when I work with leaders around that stuff, I'm always looking to help them firstly acknowledge what is the data I've got in front of me, and then move them to a level of acceptance. At the end of the day, though, it's their choice about whether they take any action about it. What I'm pleased to say is that I think, most leaders, when they put in front of themselves the data that says, hey, you're not as good as you think you are, or here's the impact you're having, um, is that I've seen some major transformational changes in leaders where they've accepted that. And the benefit has been not only to the bottom line of the business, but also personally the stress and challenges they've had
Yeah.
when they are able to move into actually enjoying the work they do. We don't always get a chance to enjoy the work we do, but I think when you can, and there's an opportunity to step into that, then that's of value.
Absolutely. So true. And so how do you support leaders in
Mm,
sustaining change long after the initial momentum? So you've had the breakthrough, you've got them into
mm.
that place of acceptance. Then what? What is that what does that path look like?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm sure you're the same, Maryanne. It's the growth mindset's what you actually need to have. Being prepared to continue to be in learning mode. Um, I speak on main stages, and I decided I wanted to be a professional speaker when I left the Navy, and it's been a journey of many years. What I know is that even the presentation I might have given last week, there is some things which I could have done to make it better. And so I think there's value in retaining an executive coach. There's value in being in a community of practice where you are sharing ideas and continually learning. I think there's value in listening to good podcasts like your own to get ideas. I'm a big fan of listening to podcasts or reading books, and there is a risk of a rabbit hole for me personally to go down, but I think it's actually testing yourself and recognizing that we are always a work in progress, and that we only get better and more effective as leaders for our people when we continue to grow and prepared to be accountable for our actions. Being prepared to have the mirror held up to us too, so that we can be reminded of where perhaps there are areas that are not going so well.
Yes, absolutely. And it is curiosity, isn't it? That really is
Mm,
an important part of all of that because you have to be curious. What else could I learn today? What else could take me deeper into that knowing? What else
yeah.
could stretch me beyond what I think I'm capable of? And for
Mm,
someone with all of your experience, for you to even say, actually, there was something that I could have done to tweak or improve that speech is mind blowing to me because for someone who is in admiration of your work, I would never have even thought you would even say anything like that. Not that you're in the ego space, but just
mm,
to know that actually just doesn't ever end. There's always something to learn. There is always something to align with, attune to expand into, and they're the
mm.
That's why that inner work is important because you're breaking through into deeper parts of yourself, aren't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think if you're not connected with that, then it becomes even harder to lead people and to be effective. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And so if any any of the listeners today, if they were going to take one action to lift themselves, their team into high performance, into a better anchor point for themselves, what would it be?
I think I'd, so a couple of things run from my mind, but I think one of the things is you've got to actually be prepared to have a good hard look into your team and organization and look at the level of trust that you have in your team. That's the foundation of this. Patrick Lencioni's done good work around this as well. The foundations of trust, and for me, if you haven't got trust, it was certainly my experience in the Navy, and since then that I haven't got trust, and so if I'm looking for that high performance, I want to understand what the baseline is of which I'm operating from. What's the level of trust have I got going on there? And actually, if there are gaps in that, what do I need to do about it? And that's certainly some of the work I've been doing recently with clients is to help them identify where they're at with from a trust perspective, and then work out what they might need to do to actually improve that level of trust that can then add to the organizational performance and achieving greater things.
Yes, I love that. Martin, for anyone listening, if they wanted to connect with you and your work, what's the best
Mm.
way for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you. Look, you can find me at martinbrooker.com or on LinkedIn. And yeah, would love to connect with people and to always happy to have these kind of conversations. And yeah, I just want, I guess my goal in life, mission in life, as I get to that sort of the third part, is to help people just be better people, and I don't mean that in a condescending or ego way. It's like I just want to. I know that I've benefited from doing that work and living life in full, and I think that's what we all were meant to be doing here while we're on Earth.
Yes, and it is paying it forward, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, when I studied kinesiology, sorry, when I had kinesiology, I went through a big trauma myself and started having kinesiology as a treatment, and then I wanted to study it, and it was then that I wanted to help other people. So I think that there is a lot of that when you go through that transformative stage, there's a part of you that wants to help others understand they don't have to stay in the pain, in the emotional turmoil, in the chaos, in the guilt, the shame,
Yeah,
whatever it is that they're feeling, the sadness. They don't have it doesn't life doesn't have to stay that way. And there are some really effective, really useful tools that you can use to give yourself permission to break through that. And then when you start seeing all of the benefits, then you can start thinking about how can I pass this on? How can I
yeah,
share this with the world in my way, in my unique expression? And I 100% agree. I think that is what we're meant to be doing. And what a difference our world would be if that was the case.
yeah. No, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you about the Navy and about the learnings from that and how that's being incorporated into your leadership style and also how you're teaching and guiding other leaders through that journey, but also with the work that you're doing with men in those groups and how you're encouraging men to really take the time to deepen and do that inner work. It's absolutely critical. So thank you again, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Maryanne. Been a pleasure to be here.